On a quiet suburban street, a gang of bikers roared in, crushing flower beds and tearing down a veteran's flag with smug grins. Their leader sneered at the elderly man standing calmly on his porch, taunting him with words meant to humiliate. They thought he was powerless, just another retiree too scared to fight back. But what they didn't know was that this man wasn't just anyone. One quiet phone call was all it took to turn their arrogance into sheer panic. What happened next left the entire neighborhood stunned. Let's start from the beginning. The sun was just beginning to break through the gray clouds as Peter Holloway stepped onto the porch of his modest home. His life was as orderly as the perfectly trimmed roses lining his front yard. Each petal seemed to hold a little bit of his meticulous care. A cup of strong black coffee steamed gently in one hand, while his other hand held a well-worn pair of pruning shears. At his feet, Max, his loyal golden retriever, sprawled lazily, soaking in the quiet morning. The tranquility shattered with the thunderous roar of engines. A gang of bikers barreled down the street, their motorcycles growling like untamed beasts. They skidded to a halt right in front of Peter's white picket fence. Their leader, a hulking man with a shaved head and a skull tattoo stretching across his neck, dismounted, surveying the scene with a smirk. "Hey, old man!" the leader bellowed, his voice carrying the smugness of someone who'd never heard the word no. "This your place?" Peter, still focused on his roses, gave a calm nod. Without looking up, he continued pruning as though a gang of leather-clad hooligans hadn't just invaded his peaceful morning. The leader exchanged a glance with his crew and chuckled. "Looks a bit boring. What do you say we liven it up?" Before Peter could respond, one of the bikers pulled a can of spray paint from his saddlebag. Another kicked over the mailbox, sending it clattering to the ground. The gang erupted into laughter as the first graffiti scrawled across the pristine fence in bright red letters. The leader plucked at the flagpole near the porch, his fingers running across the army medal hanging there. "Now, this is ugly." He yanked the medal free, tossing it to the dirt. Peter set down his coffee and stood slowly brushing dirt from his knees. His voice was even, calm, too calm. "Please don't touch the flag." The leader sneered, stepping closer. "And if we do, what are you going to do about it, Grandpa?" Peter took a step back, his eyes meeting the leader's without a trace of fear. The laughter from the gang faded as his silence stretched longer than they expected. The old man was quiet, but something in his gaze felt unsettling. Max lifted his head, letting out a low, almost imperceptible growl. The dog's usually friendly demeanor seemed to shift. The tension was palpable, the moment teetering on the edge of something none of them could quite place. The leader broke the silence with a loud scoff. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" Peter's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. Not one of humor, more like someone who'd just remembered a secret only he knew. And then he simply said, "Are you done yet?" The leader froze for a moment, caught off guard by the unexpected response. But the smirk quickly returned to his face as he motioned for his crew to continue. In the distance, a neighbor peeked out from behind a curtain, her phone in hand. The quiet street was no longer quiet. Peter, meanwhile, reached for his phone as well, not hurriedly, not with panic, just the calm, deliberate movements of someone who had done this before. "Making a call?" the leader jeered, glancing over his shoulder. "Don't bother. Nobody's coming for you, old man." Peter's fingers moved steadily over the screen, his expression unreadable. Then, without looking up, he murmured, "We'll see about that." The bikers weren't satisfied with just vandalizing the fence. One of them, a wiry man with a bandana tied around his head, sauntered up to the flagpole and with a smug grin gave it a solid kick. The pole snapped with a crack, the flag and medal falling to the ground. Another biker, a stocky man with a tattoo of flames running up his arm, began stomping through Peter's flower beds, crushing the roses he'd spent years tending. Petals scattered across the dirt like tiny red warnings. Peter didn't flinch. He simply watched, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the chaos unfolding in front of him. On the street, neighbors started gathering behind their curtains and doors. A few ventured to the edges of their yards, whispering to each other but too afraid to intervene. The tension was thick, the kind that made people feel small and powerless. The gang leader, emboldened by the lack of resistance, strode up to Peter's porch and shoved the door open. Moments later, he emerged, holding a dusty photo album. "Let's see what kind of boring life you've been hiding, old man," the leader sneered, flipping through the pages. He stopped on a photograph of a younger Peter, standing tall in a U.S. Army uniform, surrounded by a group of soldiers. The background showed a war-torn city, and the expressions on their faces spoke volumes. "Well, well," the leader drawled, holding the photo up for the others to see. "Looks like Grandpa here used to play dress-up." He laughed and ripped the photo in half, letting the pieces flutter to the ground. "This hero stuff? Ancient history," another biker jeered, snatching the album and tearing out more pages. They tossed them like confetti, laughing as the fragments of Peter's memories scattered around him. Peter's face remained unreadable, his steady gaze fixed on the leader. He stood as still as a statue, hands calmly resting by his sides. "Come on, old man," the leader taunted, stepping closer. "Show us how you protect your precious little memories." Peter tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into the faintest of smiles. "You've got quite the imagination," he said, his tone dry. The leader blinked, momentarily thrown off. "What's that supposed to mean?" Peter didn't answer. Instead, he slipped a phone from his pocket and began tapping the screen with a deliberate precision. "Oh, here we go," the leader scoffed. "Calling the cops, huh? Hate to break it to you, but they've got better things to do than babysit retirees." Peter didn't look up. "Who said I was calling the cops?" he murmured, almost to himself. The leader hesitated, the smirk faltering for a brief second before he waved it off. "Whatever, man. You think you can scare us with a phone call?" Peter didn't bother responding. He simply placed the phone back in his pocket and folded his arms, his expression as calm as ever. In the background, Max stood on the porch, his ears perked up and his sharp eyes fixed on the bikers. A low, guttural growl rumbled from the dog's throat, quiet but unmistakable. The gang leader took a step back, glancing nervously at the dog before shaking it off. "Your mutt's got more fight in him than you, Grandpa," he shouted, trying to rally his gang's laughter. The others joined in, but their chuckles were less confident now, as if they could sense the shift in the air. Peter finally broke his silence. "Enjoy your fun while it lasts," he said evenly, his voice carrying a weight that made even the boldest biker pause. A sudden buzz of engines in the distance made the gang turn their heads. The sound grew louder, closer, and unmistakably different from the rumble of their own bikes. The neighbors whispered anxiously, the tension in the air reaching a breaking point. The leader's bravado faltered as he glanced back at Peter. The old man hadn't moved, his calm demeanor now unsettling rather than reassuring. "What's coming, old man?" the leader asked, his voice tinged with unease. Peter's response was as steady as ever. "You'll find out soon enough." The sound of engines roared closer, their growing volume drowning out any remaining laughter. For the first time, the bikers looked genuinely uneasy. The stage was set, and Peter, ever the patient man, waited quietly for the next act. The distant roar of engines grew louder until the entire street vibrated with the sound. But these weren't the guttural growls of motorcycles. No, this was something more calculated, more official. Within seconds, a convoy of black SUVs with tinted windows turned the corner, moving in unison like a well-rehearsed dance. They screeched to a halt around the gang of bikers, cutting off any escape routes. The doors of the SUVs flew open, and men in dark suits and earpieces poured out with swift precision. Their movements were sharp and purposeful, leaving no doubt that this was a team that didn't mess around. "Hands up!" a commanding voice barked. The bikers froze, their bravado evaporating in an instant. The leader's cocky smirk wavered as he raised his hands reluctantly. "What's going on here?" he muttered, his confidence crumbling like the remains of Peter's flower bed. From the largest SUV stepped a tall, sharp-looking man in an unmistakable FBI uniform. His presence was magnetic, his every step oozing authority. He walked past the bikers without sparing them a glance and stopped in front of Peter. Snapping to attention, the man saluted. "General Holloway, sir. We have the situation under control." The street fell silent. The gang's leader blinked, his jaw slack. "Wait, General?" He stammered, the word catching in his throat. "You're kidding, right? This guy, the old man?" Peter, standing as composed as ever, clasped his hands behind his back. "Not just an old man," he said, his voice steady. a veteran who was giving orders while you were still learning how to ride those oversized tricycles. The subtle humor in his tone struck a nerve. One of the younger bikers muttered under his breath, "I knew something was off about him." "Quiet," the leader snapped, but the unease among his crew was palpable. Peter turned to the man in the FBI uniform. "Agent Carter, I appreciate the swift response. These gentlemen have been quite busy today. Perhaps you could help them rethink their choices." Carter nodded. "With pleasure, sir." The agents moved in, their efficiency impressive and intimidating. The bikers tried to protest, their complaints ranging from weak excuses to outright desperation. "This is a misunderstanding," the leader yelled as agents cuffed him. "We didn't know," Peter interjected, raising an eyebrow. "Let me guess. You didn't know that vandalizing property, destroying memories, and threatening someone might have consequences?" The leader opened his mouth, but no words came out. As the agents began loading the bikers into the SUVs, the gathered neighbors erupted into applause. The sound was as much a celebration of Peter's quiet strength as it was a release of tension that had hung over the street. Phones were raised, capturing every second of the scene. Carter retrieved Peter's medal and flag, dusting them off carefully before handing them back. "Sir, your property is safe again. Anything else you need?" Peter smiled, his expression warm but laced with subtle amusement. "Nothing more, Carter. You've done more than enough." Max, who had been watching the entire scene with quiet vigilance, patted over and licked Peter's hand. Peter knelt to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Good boy," he said softly, as though the entire street hadn't just witnessed a small-scale takedown. As the SUVs pulled away, the leader of the bikers glanced back at Peter, his face pale. "You're not going to forget this, are you?" Peter chuckled lightly. "Oh, I'll remember. But the question is, will you?" The street was quiet again, save for the murmurs of neighbors, exchanging astonished comments. Peter adjusted the flagpole, brushed off the dirt from his uniform, and calmly returned to his roses. "Now," he murmured to Max, "where were we?"